Okay, now that we have a decent number of people in the room, welcome to week three of Regenerative Leadership. As I was just saying, it's just fantastic to have such great participation by people in the forum. And I wanted to start with a quick couple of questions to you. One is, what has been the most significant takeaway for you for up till now of the course? What could I do better in terms of supporting you? So where are you? What do you need? So let's start with, well, what's a takeaway, something meaningful you've taken away so far? And let's just throw somebody under the bus. Uh, Priya, you seem to be very articulate. So let's see what you have to say. Well, what has been a learning that you've taken away from the course so far?
I think the takeaway for me is just how little I know and how much there is to actually work towards in really shifting this shifting I think consciousness of people towards regenerative leadership. And the forums have been really, I think, very, very interesting because there's so much that everyone is doing such interesting work. Like I've been fascinated by Michael's work and the wealth of expertise that he brings as well, all the suggestions he's made to others. And I think all of these are really incredible as a starting point. My only, I think, feedback to even the guys at UP's, Ayana and all of that was like, it's too short. There's so much to cover. But also there is so little time for us to interact and to really build collaborations unless someone I guess just says, hey, let's share our LinkedIn, or let's have a separate session outside of just our normal classes so that we can brainstorm and we can see how we can do work that is a lot more synergistic as well. So I guess that's my only, I guess, feedback around the program itself. Yeah, that's it.
Great. Well, absolutely agree. And actually, in my other work, my full-time job, students actually do create their own WhatsApp groups. And so I'd certainly encourage you to connect with each other and see how you can maintain the relationship. Things are going to get tricky out there at times, and sometimes you can really benefit from being able to have a think tank like this and create something where you got a sounding board where you say, look, I got this stupid person who just does not understand what we're trying to get across. Have you found something like this? And what have you done? And also, each of you have different contexts. So there are very different ways that each of you will approach your problem of practice, your work, and how you create that synergy that Priya was mentioning. So maybe there are some ideas in each of you that might be surprising and very powerful. So I would certainly encourage you to connect outside of the course. And yes, the courses are short. People have actually asked, can we make it a 6 week course at least? And that's why I give you 2 weeks more after the end of the course to actually complete the draft of the project, that outline, even though you won't be doing very much with the how, at least to give you, once we've covered all the content, that you can continue thinking and drafting, especially that second half of the outline, so as to create something that you can actually follow and make the most of it. But that's these are absolutely great comments. So Priya, who would you like to say something with regard to what are they taking away from the course so far? What can we do better?
Kevin?
Okay.
Okay, thanks,
You do
Priya.
the same, Kevin.
Yeah, I guess I would echo that a little bit. This is a great forum for people to bring ideas. I can imagine though people are coming in with on a different stage of those ideas. So that could, um, I wonder if there's a regenerative leadership 2 course that could be really that next part of really that you have a project already. And so I could see that maybe causing some frustration for some people, just depending on where you are on that trajectory. I've just finished another course because I'm doing the diploma at UPeace, and we talked a lot about what lifelong learning means, and this idea of this cycle of learning, unlearning, relearning, that it continues throughout your life, as opposed to just learn more things, and pile them on top of it. A different way of thinking about what that lifelong learning means. And so what I'm getting out of this course is, I'm coming out in sort of a part-time sabbatical, really kind of thinking about my work. And I think in that unlearning and then relearning process, right now I'm at this sort of that unlearning and relearning, and really wanting to incorporate in work that I've done before, but now looking at it through a new lens and looking at it and thinking about it differently through this regenerative framework. And so I think the timing for me has been really nice. It's just been worked out nicely for me. And so I'm ready to kind of walk with a project again that I've worked on in the past, but now look at it in a wholly different light and from a different perspective. And it's been lots of fun. I think I'm really kind of seeing the potential of this project in new ways that I didn't see before. And so I think that's the value that I've found. I've also, this past week, I had a great chance to speak with John over a private Zoom, a one-on-one, and that was really helpful as well. I'm thinking that's open to everybody, I assume, so to take advantage of that.
It's only you, but you paid me. You sent me that.
But that was very valuable, I think, to be able to kind of have that one-on-one session to really kind of look at this project and look at regenerative leadership in general from different angles, which helps then this idea that maybe the class is too short. Well, there is that resource as well of having like a one-on-one that I think is also pretty helpful. So yeah, those are my thoughts on it.
Right. Yeah, and certainly I offer that to everybody. So if you do want to just email me and we'll schedule a Zoom just to go over. Sometimes people are a little shy of sharing. So that's why we sometimes go into breakout rooms, but the time's so short when it's not that many people. It's wonderful to be able to interact in the larger group as well. So yes, certainly reach out if you'd like to have that conversation to see how we go deeper into the process and what other frameworks are out there, which is obviously part of the conversation this morning, just to touch on some of those other frameworks and approaches that might actually help identify ways forward where you can actually have a greater impact because you go back to the process and you trust the process, which again is difficult to write out. But this is the task for this course, is to write out the process so that you can describe it, live it, and defend it and protect it, particularly against the darker agendas that you will encounter. So, Kevin, who would you like to have to say something about what they're taking away, what we can do better?
I was seeing, is it Nele? Is there, am I pronouncing your name right?
Go ahead.
Nele, yeah.
Yeah, it's Nela. Hi.
Nila. Okay.
Nela, sorry.
Yeah, I'm really happy that I can finally participate with some stable internet connection. Yeah, my time management has been really bad and I'm only like catching up now. But apart from all the content, the frameworks, the models and everything, I'm really taking away a lot of inspiration and motivation. I'm in this in-between job phase and I'm still somehow evaluating what has been happening in the past years and what I've been working on. And now I'm like switching into like a different direction. And so yeah, I haven't really come up with a project yet, but I like learned so much from you guys and it's really inspiring. And also, as Priya said, it would be really nice to have more like personal exchange maybe even like, yeah, one-on-one, like little coffee chats, like virtual ones, obviously. So I'd be very open for that if anyone's interested. Yeah, and I've been catching up in the forum as well. It's really interesting, and I will try to be a bit more active now in the coming weeks. So thank you.
So yeah, the 10 o'clock in the morning New York time we've found to be the best, the most convenient for most people. It's never necessarily the best for everybody. So before, I actually would alternate 1 week in the morning over here and 1 week in the afternoon, but that made it impossible for some people. So the time at the moment has been this 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time here in the United States. Has that been a challenge for anybody or for a majority, or has this been okay?
For me, it was okay.
Okay.
Couldn't make it in general.
I think Priya, it's what, 11, 10 in the evening where you are? Where are you, Priya?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, which is not too bad. I've had people from New Zealand, it's been 3 in the morning.
Yeah.
And that's been, wow, what a trooper. So, anyway, let's just open up. One more person that'd like to say something about the course, and then we'll get to some of the meat of what we got for this morning or today. Anybody else like to say something about what they're taking away and what we might do better? And if not, we move forward. All right, great. Okay, so as mentioned last week, today is more about let's broaden the conversation. I do not believe that the regenerative leadership framework is a solution for just about anything. It's only a proposition. This is my work where I have found some of these key qualities, principles, skills, and behaviors that people use and that are helpful. But certainly, not everything is exhausted there. And some of you actually have been doing some remarkable things. So I think it's incredibly important that we understand the limitations of any framework, that the real work is in the work and how you do it. And I've seen some of the outlines of projects, and some of you are doing some fantastic work. So it would not be up, I would be rather arrogant to say, well, you do this and follow these principles and you'll be fine, because actually regeneration does not work that way. We create systems, and I think creating a forum like the one we've created in this group in particular, this is a fairly unique group in that we've got some, I would say, thought leaders, people who are actually active, doing things that are already meaningful and that are impacting other people in the group to respond and to align themselves. So there's an energy going on here, which is very interesting in terms of process. Just doing the communication that you're doing is having an effect. And I'd like really to emphasize the value and the importance of writing on the forum and sharing and being vulnerable. One of the great things about good leadership is vulnerability. One of the strengths of leadership is vulnerability. And as I mentioned to, Anjat said he was going to be a bit late. One of the things I think was Kevin mentioned this morning about the work, and that I responded. What is happening here is transformational, not transactional. And in the conversation we had with Kevin on Wednesday, I believe it was, we were talking exactly about this, about how to present your work. How do you walk into a conversation with nothing, only a question? And it's scary. That is something that is very difficult for us to do. However, co-creation and real engagement of stakeholders has to have as a premise that you are there to identify what it is that they want, not what you want to sell them. How do you do that if you can't trust yourself to go in with the courage to say, look, I don't know what your problem is, but together we can figure it out. Rather than, and as I said, you do be over-prepared but under-structured. So do have a portfolio with things that you've done, with projects, with things that are ongoing, that you want to bring to the table, to the conversation. But don't do that first. So the task here is, what is the first thing you do to engage your stakeholder? What is the principle behind that initial conversation? Go ahead, Michael.
Well, I I do reach out. I try to engage with stakeholders because it's definitely about community, you know, and also just to reiterate what I would have said, because somebody mentioned my name, thank you for that. But it's definitely about the group being vulnerable, and that's a great thing, that working within this group, and that's great to be in that kind of a safe space to do that. So thank you, everyone. And thank you for this place and place to do that. What I try to do when I approach stakeholders is that I always reiterate, again, so co-benefits, not transactional, right? But specifically that I always follow up a lot of the first outreach communications with people that I'm trying to look for co-benefits with the end phrase of, regardless of outcomes, that I'm supportive of what you're doing, and I will continue to be supportive of what you're doing, because this space, we have to do it together. We all have to walk this line a bit together, no matter what our contribution may or may not be. And if we don't align or the timing isn't right, that is an absolutely normal possible outcome. And that's fine to start that conversation with that parameter in place, saying there doesn't have to be a positive outcome and a co-benefit, and it may not work. So regardless of outcomes, let's keep that conversation going, is how I try to end my phrasing, and keep those conversations living.
Good. Well, it takes courage, particularly if you haven't done your homework about who you're speaking with. It can be quite frightening. So do you do your homework about the person you're going to actually have a conversation with first? Michael?
A lot of times when sometimes there's outreach, sometimes I'm getting more traction than I'm used to, I think. So sometimes I'll start at that point before I do my initial research. So I try to be the most impartial, if that makes sense, because there's some parameters already on why the conversation has already started. So if somebody's reaching out to me via LinkedIn, that's my main platform right now, and I'll use that phrasing, and then after I've sent that message, I'll go and look at the value of that person or where they might fit in, because the outcome result and not being transactional, and that idea of just having that conversation and keeping that conversation going, is impartial. And then I'll look at them and I'll see if something makes sense, or if they're way above me and I'm really scared, you know, because also sometimes it's better not to look in some aspects. So that's what I'll do. And then I'll look, and then I'll see where it fits, and what, if I have to do some deep dive research, or if it's something that it's in my wheelhouse, and then I might do immediate follow-up message, or I let the conversation go in its natural progression.
Okay. So just to acknowledge that Amjad's joined us, and thank you, and no worries about being late. So from the presentation for today, I wanted to just go through a couple of things. Here's the one about the types of conversation, to see if you can identify where you are in that conversation, particularly in groups, as this does help in a way, I think, to diagnose the health of that particular conversation. So I don't know if you've been able to go through the presentation for today. So if you have, great, and please contribute. And if you haven't, well, this will be your first time. So this is based on the work of Otto Scharmer. So Theory U, of course, and leading from the Emerging Future, the work with his partner Katrina, and Otto's at MIT. He has the Presencing Institute, and I've done some work with him. And this is taken from Theory U, what he calls the 4 fields of conversation, which I think is an interesting framework. Once again, 4 quadrants. I don't know why in the 21st century we've got so many frameworks that have 4 quadrants. But if you look at the visual here, the infographic, when we're talking about the primacy of the whole, can we consider the wholeness of the system and the people and all of their situations in it, versus just focusing on the primacy of the parts? Regeneration is only possible when we break down silos and connect the systems so that they flow together. So in the corporate setting, of course, administration, the accountants actually run the place and they tell everybody else what to do because they've got to get to the bottom line has to be black at the end of the quarter and the year. And the leaders actually set a vision that they might follow or not follow, and the people on the ground have no clue as why they're there. They're just told to, and they take away a paycheck. That is fragmentation. And every system we look at tends to be fragmented, whether it's in academia, whether it's industry, agriculture, healthcare, politics. Everything tends to be fragmented into pieces. And that is actually obliging us to repeat the things of the past. What Kevin was saying about actually unlearning and relearning, what Otto Scharmer would call letting go. Can we let go of the ways of thinking that no longer serve us? That's the key, because that's the first thing, as other people have said, you can't put new files into a filing cabinet until you've emptied it. And can we empty the filing cabinet in order to come up with completely new ways, because the old ways are not working? So at the bottom, we're going to be seeing the things that are not working. So as we come into a conversation, you notice that when you don't know people very much or very well, we're very tactful, we're very diplomatic, we're cautious, we don't expose ourselves, we don't engage, we don't conflict. However, as soon as the agenda comes out, things happen. If a conversation has not been well designed, inevitably, we're going to have the conflict of agendas and interests. This doesn't work. This is reenacting the ways of before. This is the past and fragmentation. This is no alignment of minds into a common purpose. And it's only when we recognize this that we realize that there is no way that we can actually take an agenda to a meeting where nobody else has participated in the creation of that agenda. Unless everybody has had a voice and an invitation to participate in the creation of that agenda, that meeting is condemned to become a conflict in one way or another, or the passive withdrawal of the participants. Some people will not engage because they have not been consulted. They've not been invited to be a part of the creation of the reason for that meeting. So that's very old. That's very 19th and 20th century. Today, we're much better than that. We are better at conversation. So once we get into beginning to integrate, we get into what we call reflective dialogue, where we can actually see that the other person has something of value to offer, and vice versa, hopefully, which promotes this idea of empathy, of coming together. This is what I've seen happen on the forum this week. There has been this coming together, this opening to possibility that is completely different from below the horizon there. But this is still not enough to be totally transformative and regenerative. It's only when we're willing to engage in this kind of dialogue that regeneration becomes possible. So I would say this is the ideal. Can we go into the conversation with no agenda? And this way you can look at, if you're familiar with open space technology, are you familiar with that? World Cafe is another technique. Then I have another thing to show you here about the compass, which can also help. The idea of coming to a conversation with just the question, what's important here at this time for you? And for that sharing with no boundaries, where we are only absolutely present in that moment, creating a conversation around purpose, around the why. And that is your homework, really. That's the process. It's as simple as that. And not doing that is almost guaranteed to take you down to the old ways of thinking and the old ways of behaving of, oh, right, I need to be able to tell them that I'm an expert, that I know what I'm doing, that I've done all of these things. I've got a track record. I have all of these credentials, which are all great. However, if they come in too early, they take over the conversation. Particularly if you're working with people who are in very vulnerable circumstances, highly uneducated, very vulnerable, and who have no power. Everything you might say when you bring in your credentials communicates power, the power to solve their problems, and creating a relationship of dependency, which is what major um, um, philanthropies and NGOs tend to do. They come in because they know they have the skills, they got the know-how, they've done it before. They come into a new context, they do the solution, they create the jobs, whatever it is. Then they leave, and people go back to old ways of being, or worse, because sometimes they would destroy the environment around it. So the natural environment is less healthy than it used to be. So again, understanding the importance of bringing the conversation into this kind of environment, this kind of dimension where people feel empowered to participate, where their voice is valued. How do you do that? Because it's easy to say, but it's not easy to do. So in each of your contexts, which are very different from each other, you know the kinds of people that you will be working with and how to actually talk with them in order to make it possible for something long-term, important, valuable to come out of that that might not be what you originally were thinking they would be wanting or needing. So can you be sufficiently not married to what you want to bring as a solution so that you can co-create the new and co-design the new solution? Again, that's part of your homework too, because some of you are already involved in very important things or very large scale things. And I think I just mentioned to Amjad in his forum post this morning, how does he, in this very large operation, create his model of leadership that will ensure that when you scale up, the scaling up will maintain its integrity? It won't become corrupted by other influences. How do you ensure that you can protect the different elements that you believe are essential to long-term change that will create that world in the future through backcasting where everybody is free and everybody is prosperous and everybody is health and everybody has a life of meaning and value? Whether we're at 8 billion or we've been hacked down to 500 million because of some disease, or whether we have 20 billion, which the planet, of course, cannot support. But maybe we can figure it out by coming together. So any thoughts about that and how this affects you in your process? Any insights? I can see people nodding, so yes, okay. But now, how does that translate to your context?
I think for me, it's exactly what you said. How can you, not married to the solution so that you can be open to co-creation? A lot of times I come into the conversation wanting to drive people towards the solution that you have in your mind. And for me in my project, I've had this idea, and now I'm slowly bringing together, hopefully, a community that I can work with. I also realize as I'm having these conversations, every single person has a lens of their own, and so everyone's going to want to actually sort of, I guess, champion their lens. And so it's really about being detached enough to say, okay, all of these things are important aspects of, say, for me, the leadership program, but how can we maybe co-create to come up with something holistic that will address each one of the areas that we are interested in?
Okay. So let me share the next framework. How many of you are familiar with the work of David Cooperrider, An Appreciative Inquiry? Okay. So this, what you see on screen, is the traditional approach to how we solve problems. Does this look familiar? We go where there's a problem, right? We identify the problem, we identify the need, we do the root cause analysis, we come up with possible solutions, we create the action plan, the implementation plan, and that basic assumption at the bottom is that an organization or a community is a problem to be solved. Unfortunately, this model, this mental model, is part of the reenactment of the past. This is the traditional linear model of an understanding of where we are, what we're doing, and focusing on something that quite often that problem is not the problem. It's one aspect of a situation that's much more complex. And it also devalues the participation of individuals in the creation of something better. Why? Because you're focusing on a problem. So David Cooperrider, now 40 years ago, has been bringing out a completely different approach, which is this. Who are we and what do we want? Can we dream where we want to go and who we want to be and what we want to become? And that envisioning of that what might be is far more powerful than focusing on a problem. Does that make sense? To consider, and obviously, if you want to go deeper into this, I'd recommend reading up on David Cooperrider's work in Appreciative Inquiry and the framework that he has. And the conversation is, what should this be? In this context, what Pri was saying, that conversation, what could we become here? Rather than saying, oh, well, there isn't enough food, we've got to do something about food. Yes, of course, we will take care of that. But that is only the problem. The bigger conversation is about who do we want to become? This is what's inspiring. This is what connects with a purpose. Satisfying the need for, obviously, nutrition is only one element of a much bigger picture. And the basic assumption of that conversation, that work, is there's a mystery here that we need to embrace rather than a problem to be solved. If you can bring that mindset, that will actually activate or actualize what Kevin was saying before about trying to unlearn. We have learned that we go in and solve problems. Unfortunately, solving a problem has a tendency to create other unanticipated consequences, which can be more problematic than the original problem. So people need water. We put in a hydroelectric dam in the middle of the desert. We dam a river. We flood a town or a village. We interrupt the whole environmental health of that place. We force people into doing some sort of mass agriculture because now we've got water to irrigate, and we break the culture. And so we solve one problem, but we create a multiplicity of other problems. And so the process on the left tends to be more problematic than helpful. Whereas the way on the right, which again takes courage of going into a conversation, whether it's in the village square or whether it's in a university or in a governmental office or the United Nations, can we, instead of being continuously reactive and trying to solve problems and playing whack-a-mole, which unfortunately tends to have very little positive long-term results, how can we change the nature of the conversation to one where we dream together? And so if you go into obviously the Aboriginal storytelling about dreaming, or you go to the ayahuasca in Peru and experience the breaking down of everything that we believe and get away from the rational mind into the realm of possibility, how do we bring a conversation about the realm of possibility into a corporate boardroom or into an NGO board that might be also very set in its ways. How do we break down that way of thinking? And that is a challenge. So again, I don't have the solution for you. I'm only suggesting that bringing in the capacity to visualize what is could be possible and what we really want can be very powerful in the making it possible for the co-creation, for that multiple stakeholder engagement, because then you can have a conversation where everybody can contribute, not only the people with the expertise and the background and the past projects, but the people who are actually suffering the consequences of whatever is happening in that particular environment. So does this raise any thoughts about how you might approach your how? Is it so clear that it doesn't need any conversation?
John, I mean, maybe I just want to add a few things on the appreciative inquiry, because I've
Absolutely.
done this in the organization. I think one thing that really is great, that it shifts the paradigm for people, because when you start talking, people automatically want to get into problem solving, right? This is the problem with the organization that we're in. And then when you start saying, well, actually, no, tell us a time when you felt empowered or when you felt enlightened or whatever, and then suddenly they have to they stop and they pause and they switch, right? So I think it's in that sense it's really interesting and in to kind of think about that perspective. And I think the one thing that I learned about the appreciative inquiry is the power is in the question. What is the question that you're asking? And so you have to spend a lot of time thinking about the question.
Do you have an example of a question?
Yes, the question that I put there, which was, tell us a time when you felt most inspired by your time in this organization. What was it? What did you feel like? Who was there? So that's a powerful question that we've used in the past.
Okay. With World Cafe, and I've done several of these. If you're not familiar, certainly Google World Cafe as a technique, as a practice, or as an activity. The question on the table is, what's the most important thing for us at this time? And allowing everybody to say what it is for them, and you rotate throughout different tables. You've done this has been done with 3,000 people remotely, in person, with a group of 10 people, where you rotate them through tables. So it's a wonderfully elastic activity in the sense that it can be used with many, many people. And in the end, while the moderators at each table are collecting the responses to that question, as they do that multiple times at different tables, people hear each other at different tables in different situations. The data is collected and then compiled into, well, 80% of people have as their greatest concern this. So now you've got a collective purpose that has already been identified as this is the most important thing for us now. So it's a great way of actually sifting through what people at the top or the bottom might think is the biggest issue at this time. And if from that issue we can turn that into a dreaming exercise, well, where do we want to see ourselves? You can bring in appreciative inquiry and turn that into something rather more transformational, again, than transactional. Once you have that on the table, and again, I encourage you to explore open space technology, the basis of which is this idea of whoever comes to the meeting are the right people. Whatever is talked about at that meeting is the right topic. So that's one of the scariest ones, where you just invite and you open up this kind of Socratic dialogue. The other one, and we were talking about this about Amjad, I don't know if you're familiar with the 5 whys, the Japanese technique of making sure that when you ask a question and somebody answers, you say, well, why do you think that is happening? and they will give it a response. And then you say, well, why do you think that's happening? Once you go through 3 or 4 whys, suddenly, what Kevin was talking about, the unlearning begins to happen, because we start realizing that water wasn't really the problem. It's the underlying, there's a whole thing that's happening much bigger that's underlying. And it, usually, when it goes back to the origin of the problem, it's human ignorance. And eventually, you tend to go back to the fact that we really don't know how to manage this planet at all, and each other even less. So once you start getting to those deeper whys, that actually allows people to come to what Amjad said, this a shift in their paradigm, a shift in their belief system about how things operate. And how things operate is the topic of the next slide, or the next 2 slides actually, of when we have a problem-solving approach or mindset, we use the linear approach to solving problems. So the conventional design is a linear approach. This is the problem. We bring in the experts. They tell us what to do. They bring in the workers. Then they bring in somebody else. And in the end, the consumer gets the product with all its flaws and unintended consequences. For you, your homework for this particular project is this. You must bring in all your stakeholders to the design table from day one. Before you put any solutions out there to the problem or even identify the problem, you need to have a broad conversation. This is what we do with the United States Green Building Council project, for example, for sustainable building, or sustainable agriculture. You need to have, if in this case, the client is not in the middle, you are in the middle. You are the facilitator of this process. The client is over here. So if this is your community, the project where you're going to work, the garden you're going to build, whatever it is that you're going to do, the client represents that project. You as a facilitator then will pull in everybody who needs to be part of the design of the solution at that moment before you start doing anything. And you don't convene people in a linear model. It's only when you can create that conversation around the topic that you can create something that will be regenerative. And how you do that goes back to the initial conversation. So considering how you actually unpack your project, whether you're in business, whether you're in a community, in education, as in the case of this particular framework. And again, you can go back to these later. So here's Peter Senger's work, again, Otto Scharmer's mentor, about how in business you can drive business towards sustainability. And I'm not going to go through each of these because this is a bit complex. If you're interested in that, the book is here, The Necessary Revolution, How Individuals and Organizations Are Working Together to create a Sustainable World. Great book for those of you in business, how to create great large-scale collaborations between people that hate each other, like Coca-Cola and the World Wildlife Fund. And how do you do that? So finding out how you bring people together. And of course, Caroline's project about how can we get, or how can she get Palestinians and Israelis to have a conversation about going a future that is shared rather than antagonistic. So some of these issues that you people are working on are really, really complex. So when you get into sustainable communities, is another framework. So I encourage you to look through these, depending on the work you're doing. And what I'm seeing in your posts in the forum, many of you are already doing this kind of work. So again, my job is to go back to the how. So this is my approach to the strategic improvement cycle or regenerative strategy cycle. This is the big question. What is the most important change we're wanting to make? And you know what that is, most of you. But the process, how do we get everybody committed to making the change happen? That's the task, that's the process. And then, of course, you will do everything, and this goes back to Peter Drucker. I've added a new, a fifth step in the model. He has a 4-step model, which goes back to, strategic planning, which is basic situation analysis, developing a strategy from your understanding of the problem. So once you've identified the situation or the dream, can we actually do the research that we need to do to create a strategy? Can we create this visioning process that is collective? Then how do we implement this? How do we create, what are we, and I've just added some of the frameworks here that you might think about. We'll be talking about adaptive leadership and the work of Ron Heifetz at Harvard next week. And if you're not familiar, Ron Heifetz, I really recommend, and of course, Frederick Laloux, but we'll work. So I've introduced this particular step in the process or in the strategy cycle, is that long-term projects suffer from loss of motivation and momentum. How do you support long-term projects? What are your short-term wins? What do you celebrate? How do you keep people's motivation going 3 months, 6 months, 12 months into a project? What have you put in place as milestones where you're going to stop and get drunk or dance in the streets or have a party or do something to recognize the work and bring everybody together to celebrate? So thinking about long-term projects, how would you actually create that celebration of those results along the way? Otherwise, you will find that people keep dropping off and you don't know why. So how do you keep bringing people back in? How do you maintain an online network, such as what you're suggesting, to keep people excited and enthusiastic and engaged? So what are those tools where you are sharing stories? And some of you have been talking about storytelling. Can you use stories to continue keeping the momentum going? So thinking about monitoring that implementation and keeping up the excitement and enthusiasm. Realizing that your original change may need refinement. You need to consider that your initial project, at least the objective or goal of that original project, is going to change over time. Do you have the mechanisms in order to actually make the necessary changes when you do your measurement results? And then you do get into more of a rational mode where you do measure and realize that things are going very well, better than you expected, or not as well as you thought. What are those mid-course corrections? And then doing those celebrations of short-term wins. And obviously at the end, as I said, with your personal leadership action plan, the PLAP, what are your key performance indicators? Have you met them or not? And do you have qualitative as well as quantitative? What is the degree of happiness of the people involved in the solution at the end? Not just have you created more widgets or more food, which is great. Yes, your quantitative data, of course, are important. But what are the qualitative indicators that you want to accomplish or attain at the end of a cycle of the project? And are those shared? And have they been actually created or co-created by everybody? So what do we want to see at the end? Our kids are healthier, our streets are safer, our spaces are greener, our food is more nutritious, and also we are more confident, we're happier, we are obviously less vulnerable or less at risk, we're less afraid, so we feel better, safer. So what are those indicators? And again, there are frameworks, and I think I mentioned to Kevin on Wednesday, if you're not familiar with the sustainability pyramid of Alan Atkinson, that's a great way to work on this to create that capstone approach to the project. And we can talk about that in another space with individuals, if you will. So how do you do this? As I was saying to Amjad on Wednesday, when you have a very large stakeholder group, it's critically important at this stage that you keep it to yourself and just your internal stakeholders to create the prototype. Again, this is simple, stupid. Some of you are way beyond that. That's fine. But how do you maintain the integrity of the model if you have many voices coming at you that have not been educated in the regenerative approach. So there, the more you can protect the project at this time, the better, until you go incorporating them. Once you have a model that you feel can stand up to the challenge that obviously are going to be thrown at you. And here are some notes about why and what. Basically, we've covered all of this, and because of the work you're doing, many of you are even more familiar than I am with how to make this work. And how good we are at systems thinking, of course, is some of us think we understand systems, but basically, to get to this here at the bottom right, how do we generate models that are actually complex enough to really incorporate everything that's happening in the system? So it's not a linear model of stocks and flows, and there's a link to the work of Donella Meadows and her work in systems thinking. And obviously, there's all sorts of things out there. The Waters systems thinking website. There's all sorts of models about systems thinking and computer models. More importantly, as individuals, we cannot think in systems. We need to be able to sense that systems are far more complex than anything we can control. So we need to be open, to be flexible enough to be able to adapt to the systems around us in such a way that we will minimize. I think it's almost impossible for us to eliminate our impact on systems. Healthy. Obviously, we want to be healthy in our impacts. But it's almost impossible to avoid negative impact. Can we minimize those to the greatest degree possible? Let me just close this up. So that you can see that the work you're doing is growing gradually and then hopefully exponentially in such a way that the impact continues to be minimal. And this is the idea of, are you familiar with entropy? The second law of thermodynamics, that in a system with no entropy, and what I call in social entropy, zero entropy is love. Where there is love, there is no friction. Entropy is systems that build up friction and therefore release energy and heat and eventually can actually collapse because they actually get out of control. They fall into chaos. Zero entropy is that perpetual motion machine that can go on forever without creating friction. And for me, socially, that is perfect love. And how do we generate that in terms that people can understand is empathy, compassion, sense of belonging, sense of place, shared purpose. How do we translate love into actionable items? And not, or in the case of faith, as with Amjad's work, how do you create a sense of belief in the possibility of humanity to be a steward of the planet in such a way that we can continue prospering while maintaining and preserving the health of the planet and everybody there, where everybody has equal opportunity to flourish. And that for me is an expression of love and zero entropy. To get to that, we need to create the prototype that will work. How do you defend love from greed? Or political interest, or corruption, or, I mean, when you start getting into it, as soon as ego gets in the way, love cannot operate. It's all about self-interest and self-satisfaction. And that will become apparent very quickly as you create those conversations. So again, how do you operationalize that is what I want you to describe in the process of the project, the leadership process. How do you create communities of caring where those conversations can happen, where whatever results will be the right result? So you're not even actually putting the result as the goal, the goal will come of itself. So in Caroline's case, for example, the conversation is the goal at this time, but there's nothing else that can be thought beyond. Can we even consider or envision a conversation as possible? And how? And one of the ways to do that is, and Caroline, this is based on the work of Michael Gerson and how to create dialogue across conflict, is what cannot be on the agenda? What can we not talk about in that first conversation? And obviously, beliefs is one thing that cannot be talked about in that particular system, in that conversation. And you have to decide what it is that is clearly off the table at this time in order for anything to happen. So whether you want to get Putin to talk to Zelensky or, again, whoever it is in Gaza and Jerusalem, how you can, these are things that you know, I can't help you with, but you know how you can make that happen, or maybe. And so that infinite possibility is there, but clearly people have not been able to find it yet. So thoughts, what are you going to do in order to unpack the conversation using the regenerative leadership framework, using whatever it is that you need to actually take your project to the next step? Thoughts? Let's hear from somebody who hasn't spoken. Rupinder, what are you going to do? What are you thinking?
I think trust building will be the first step.
The first step would be what?
Trust building.
Okay, trust building. How?
Like, I think active listening can play a big role here. Like,
Okay.
making them feel that their voices are heard and they're respected.
Right.
And when that actually happens, I think they'll open up more about the problem.
That's a great answer. Trust is a result. Trust is earned. It's not something you can impose. So how you go about generating trust has to do with how you respect people, your personal integrity, if necessary, a shared set of norms that you design with your stakeholders. So there is a code of conduct so that you're coherent and you don't personalize. So any issue that comes up is not about the person who's ignorant or foolish, but that there is a problem that we share. And if you are coherent and consistent, trust will be a result. And so trust building is definitely something. Trust is the lubricant within a perfect system, has no entropy. So if you call love maybe the bigger thing, I would say that trust is the derivative of, if we love one another, we will trust one another. Even if we fight, because it's not about not having disagreement, it's about trusting that we have the more important goal together, which is shared, and that we trust that everyone who's in this conversation has that same goal. It's when the goal changes that trust disappears. And people begin to respond to their stakeholders, their constituencies, that suddenly we realize that they are bringing a completely different angle into the conversation. And that angle is not the protection of the common project. It's the protection of a sectarian or fragmented project. And as soon as that happens, whether it's the people who have the money or the power or the actual desire to actually help you solve their problems for them, as soon as that happens, we're not together in this and understanding the underlying desires and visions, and trust will disappear. So can you measure trust? And that's a question for everybody. Can you put in place something that will help you measure the degree of trust in your team or organization? That's a rhetorical question. You don't have to answer that one. And also, we're coming to the end of our hour, so we've got to finish here. So I'll stop recording. For next week, we will be getting to some more additional frameworks, but wonderful to see you already participating in the forum. Please continue to do so. I'll be sending out the recording with the sort of the recap of the session. And again, if anybody wants to have a meeting with me individually, please reach out. If you feel confident about moving forward with that section of the project, there is a project on the Week 3 site about a group of women who actually conducted a sustainability pyramid process, a workshop process. So you can look at that. But again, there's just too much ground to cover. And as Priya said at the beginning, in 4 weeks, it's hard to get through all of it and be able to. I don't like teaching this stuff. I believe that a conversation around what is important to you is more productive. And then we can bring in different resources, which you will find on the different pages of the course. And I've curated them to the point where I've tried to keep them to the minimum needed, not to frighten people away. But there are obviously going to be topics there that are not there that if you want to bring them to my attention, or if you have new or other resources, do share them with me. And I'll be glad to put them on the course. So any final comments, any questions, anything I can do to help before we cut off? Okay, then I'll stop recording.